going to go into communication signals. We're going to start around the visual. I just want to mention gestures. They're important in person and virtually to have some expression. And when I think about it, if I'm sitting across from, let's say, Eileen at a table, I'm going to gesture table and up. So that's similar to what I want to do in a virtual meeting, that I keep my gestures a little higher so you can see them. But what I notice is, although we use our hands every day to email, to drive, to wash dishes, I mean, a million things we do, we get in front of a group of people and we go, what do I do with my hands? Like super self-conscious of it. So I would encourage you, and if you're writing any of this down, to think about gesturing this way as a way to gesture meaning. So if I'm saying, we're expecting a lot of market volatility, I might, if you're a bull versus a bear, I might do it with my hands, or where our team was, where our team's going, or the project is, where the project's going, or I'm gesturing the meaning of more versus less, or I'm open to your questions, right? I wouldn't like cross my arms. I have 3 ideas I'd like to share with you. Or our numbers this quarter have increased 15%. So I'm showing you examples of gesturing meaning. That's like the ideal. So don't sit on your hands. Don't do parade rest with them behind your back. Use your gestures, but hold them and make them purposeful, so it doesn't look like you're landing planes and getting people distracted. So it also can help when you're in person to work a screen, because it whether it's an old-fashioned screen like this or a flat screen that you often see now in hotel conference rooms, because it gives you something very intentional to do with your hands. And here are some best practices with using, I want to say, projected presentations. You want to stand to the left, typically in the US, because we read in English from left to right. So it's easiest if you can stand for the audience's left, because it's where they start the sentence or the beginning of the graph. Don't block the view. People are still walking into the light and blocking part of the audience, just not maybe used to it post-COVID. And I just see a lot of that when we're in person. What we call the 3 T's. What are the 3 T's? Touch, turn, and talk. Like you're a tour guide of this content. Like, here's the Grand Canyon. So I'm pointing, here's the snake path where it starts. How many of you have heard of the snake path? Seeing a few hands. So what I'm doing there, I'm touching, which is pointing, turning back to the audience and talking. That's what we mean by the 3 T's. Maintaining eye contact as much as possible with the audience, so you're really connecting with them. And then blanking the screen in person. Now, this is something that only really works in person, even though it's hard to explain it, but it works virtually for you, but not for your audience. So right now, if I hit the letter B, my slide goes black, but you guys still see it, right? So if I hit B again, I bring it back. It only works in person for us. So when I'm in person, like I was for a 4-hour program yesterday, I would occasionally blank it out if I had a question for the audience, or they were asking me a question which was, not slide related. I blank it out, and then I re-engage the audience by blanking out and later putting it back on. The way we recreate that when we're virtual is by doing what we did when we got back from the breakout, which is going back to gallery view. So it stops sharing your slide, recreates that black slide, and lets people connect, and then you go back in. So again, it's called B, the B key. So it's a really good tool for you to use. I'm not sure how often you're in person delivering presentations, but that's when you can own your geography. That's when you can move with purpose and intention. And I think, just like being agile between Teams and Zoom, we have to be agile between being virtual and in person, and keeping both of those skill sets developed, because throughout our careers, we'll be doing both. Vocally is important both in person and virtually, but I would say even more important virtually. Having vocal variety and having some energy to our voice is really important. Some of these areas really stand out. Volume. Can everyone hear you? Usually you need a microphone once you hit about 20 people in person. 20 to 30, depend on if you're someone who's always really loud, you probably can get to 30, but if you have a softer voice, it might be more like 15 to 20. So people underestimate all the time, and then we can't hear them. So it's almost like someone likes listening to a podcast, but the audio connection isn't good. You're not going to listen to it, because the audio experience is so important, and the audio experience of communication is so important. We want to make sure that they can hear us volume wise, but that we have maybe some variety, that I'm louder sometimes, softer sometimes, making people lean in. I want to make sure that my cadence also varies, that I'm fast at times, Other times I slow down for new or technical information. Yesterday was a particular challenge. I was working with a pharmaceutical company with clinical scientists, about 20 of them. Half the group was from Japan, half the group was from the US. All the folks from, well, the whole group had just gotten back from ASCO, which is American Society of Clinical Oncologists. So they were all in for this meeting. I was told that everyone from Japan can speak and write in English, but that they're not using daily fluency. And that was definitely the case. So I really worked on slowing down yesterday, enunciating my consonants, not using too many idioms, and pausing. So being aware against what does this situation need? Was it going a little slow for most of the folks born and working in the United States? Probably, but half the group was from another country. It's so impressive to be able to take a class in another country. My high school level Spanish would not allow me to do that. So certainly want to be aware of that situation. Cadence, volume, varying it, and inflection. Inflection is showing people you care what you're saying. Now, your inflection may not be as loud as someone else's, but you can still emphasize like a bold in a Word document. Also pausing. We know that vocal variety and that energy matters, but so does pausing. Pausing gets people to really focus on what we're saying. It's like a mental sorbet. But most of us fill it up. We fill it up with ahs, with ums, with a variety of fillers because we're so uncomfortable with pausing. That was something I really worked on yesterday. And it's hard. It's hard for me not to go fast and to minimize those fillers. And that is a lifetime goal for us in terms of communication for most of us. Here are other things that you want to be intentional about, in this case, avoiding. Fillers like uhs and ums. There are other types of fillers as well, verbal fillers, which we'll get to. Upspeak, otherwise known as rising intonation. So this takes our power away. So if I said, the project will work, and you're like, Amy, are you asking if it'll work, or are you saying it will work? Because I said, look, this project will work. I look down in my voice when we use a period or we want to sound definitive, but we rise up with our voice to ask a question. That's not intuitive. That's something that people learn when they're learning to read and speak in a country and a culture. So if I'm sounding very Kardashian and I'm like, that's interesting, it's like, is she asking or is she telling? Sometimes I'm hearing more vocal fry than I am upspeak. And that also is another Kardashianism. But in our presentation skills class, I'm hearing people say, there's a few ways we can look at this. You know, market access has, do a full vocal fry that I heard. Market access has a lot of challenges right now that we have to look at. That's a little vocal fry. And I'm hearing it much more than I did a few years ago. Trailing off, starting loudly, but trailing off at the end of a sentence, and poor diction are all things that can come up. Your words also matter. So we want to be smart about things like acronyms and jargon. Does your audience know the acronyms that you're using? An example I've given people lately is my older son just finished his freshman year in college. And when he was a junior, we're starting to look, in that case, it was COVID, so virtually at schools. And there was all these acronyms and jargon I didn't know, I wasn't familiar with, such as EFC, NPC, I wrote a list down, CSS, OOS, SLAC. Some of these you might now be familiar with, ED, ED2, EA, RD, FAFSA, and yield. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know any of this. Like NPC is net price calculator, that every college has a net price calculator where you put in your specifics and it'll churn out about what you'll be expected to pay before you start the looking process, application process, to get a sense of what's likely. And it's supposed to be quite accurate. I didn't know what NPC was. So know your audience. Would they be familiar with that like inside baseball language, or do you need to define it and explain it? Hedging language and unnecessary qualifiers. So sometimes you want to use qualifiers, think, might, may, hopefully. But other times you want to use stronger language, urge, recommend, suggest, encourage are stronger words. So being intentional about that. What to avoid verbally, tag questions, the more people say, someone says, the more we question if they do. Okay, right. Those are tag questions. It's good to check in with your audience, but do an actual check-in. That's just rhetorical, the tag questions. And the overuse of verbal fillers. Actually, basically, so are the more the verbal versus the vocal, which are uhs and ums. So we looked at a lot of content today around delivery dynamics, what people see. So think about that on Zoom. They see the slides and maybe the chat or any interactive tools. They see your facial expressions, maybe a little bit upper body and gestures. They see our background. They see our lighting, how we frame that image, our dress, or at least part of it. What do they say during COVID? We're all like business on top, party down below, right? They see part of us. So, and again, our gestures. So that's the visual. In person, they can see even more. Vocal, volume, rate, tone, diction, inflection, what they hear in our voice, and verbal is the words we use, the language that we use.